What's up, guys? Welcome back to News. We have a bunch of stuff to talk about, a bunch of topics to go over, but I do want to say first, if you have not subscribed and entered the 50,000 subscriber giveaway, check the description down below because it has a link where you can go enter to be a part of the 2DS XL giveaway and give yourself a chance to win a new 2DS XL when that comes out. And with that out of the way, let's get started. So the first thing we're going to talk about today is pretty interesting, and that is the confirmation that Dragon Quest XI appears to be coming westward and it will be localized. And the news came out from Gamer.nl, who pretty much confirmed from a Dutch PR company that they would be handling the promotion for Dragon Quest XI when it does come out in the West and in Europe. And that's interesting because while we all probably assume that it will be showing up, things like Dragon Quest X still have not. But we also know something like Monster Hunter Double Cross has no plans currently to come over to the West. And that's kind of an issue as well, because while we usually assume, hey, these things are showing up, there's never a confirmation, or really never a guarantee until we hear a confirmation, I should say. So it's great to hear that Dragon Quest XI is coming over. They just haven't told us at all when it is coming over. It still technically is kind of trying to make its way out in Japan, and we don't know anything about the Switch version yet. I assume when it comes here, it'll have all the versions. It'll just be the Switch, the PS4, and 3DS all releasing on the same day rather than have a staggered release for the Switch. But it's great to know that this game and this series are coming over to the West. We just don't know when. However, if a PR company already knows they're handling promotion, it could be as soon as next year, early next year even. Like we could see like February or March where we start to get wind that it is showing up and then finally get a release date. Very cool to see. It needs to get here soon. I want to play this game because we've seen so many previews of it, but every time I see a preview, I remember it's only out in Japan, so I have to wait till we see it here. Hopefully it's sooner than later. Next up, we finally got the Rayman Super Nintendo prototype game dumped to the internet. It is now downloadable, and you could play it in an emulator or what I assume a reproduction cart. I was considering making one. I might still try it because after checking the specs for it, it seems pretty straightforward. In fact, if you watched the video I did where I made a Dragon Ball Z cartridge, which you can check in the cards above, it looks to be the same process. Actually looks like it probably will work on the same type of board overall. But I did load it up in an emulator to try it out, and it's maybe not worth making because it is very much an unfinished game. There's not a ton to do in it, but to see the possibility of Rayman eventually showing up on the Super Nintendo back in the day and then canceled, shelved even, it's kind of a shame. I would have liked to have seen that game show up, but times were moving quick. The PS1 and the Saturn and everything were coming out, and they kind of had to maybe work their way towards the PS1 and the Nintendo 64, that generation instead. Much like what happened with Star Fox 2, where games in 3D were looking much better on the PS1, so they kind of had to axe Star Fox 2 over on the Super Nintendo. Either way, cool to see a shelved piece of history made public. Yes, you yourself can go download it. That's over on Omar, his Twitter handle. He went ahead and posted it there. Next up, we now know the size of Splatoon 2 and the Mario Rabbids Kingdom game. And this is interesting because it's showing that Nintendo their compression for the Switch is pretty good. I assume if they spend the time doing it, they can get some pretty small file sizes. Now that also, of course, has to do with resolution. The reason the Xbox One X, for example, has north of 100 gigabyte downloads is because they're using 4K textures, whereas working with something like 720p, 900p, or 1080p can be less, although to be fair, the Xbox One and the PS4 can have pretty lengthy installs up to 50 gigs. However, the Splatoon 2 and the Kingdoms file sizes are a little surprising here. Getting started, Splatoon 2 seems to weigh in at 3.1 gigabytes, whereas Mario Rabbids Kingdom weighs in at 2.3 gigabytes, which you can see on the shop channel here, and it's very interesting that they're so small. Now, it also seems to mention amiibo support. However, we don't know which amiibos will work and what their functions are. But to see these games so small, when we were concerned about things like the 32 gigabyte internal size, and then it's shrunken down from there to like 26 gigabytes after the OS takes its share, it's nice to know that these two games, along with ARMS, are pretty manageable. They're not large. It's very nice to kind of boot up your Switch, realize it's only a 2 to 3 gigabyte download comparative to a PS4 or an Xbox One game where it can be 30 gigs or more. So instead of waiting hours and hours to download, depending on your connection, you can have it downloaded in 20, 30 minutes, maybe an hour at the most. I like that it's more manageable. It's starting to get to a point where people maybe haven't needed an SD card until this point. Maybe they still won't need it until maybe a little more third-party games come out. I mean, somehow these two games are this small, but then we have things like Dragon Quest Heroes 1 and 2 that is larger than the internal space can handle. So I'm not really sure what's going on with file compression here. Now, we have seen games like Fast RMX, but they are known for their small file size, but it seems like third-party companies are having a harder time maybe with their compression. I'll be very curious when Dragon Ball Xenoverse 2, for example, comes out, and we can see the file size of that, and we can directly compare it to the PS4 and the Xbox One version for maybe a better size comparison. It's interesting because Rabbids doesn't look like a tiny game, and of course Splatoon 2, while starting at 3.1 gigs, I'm sure it will get larger as maps and modes and stuff are added. Those are two pretty small-sized games. It's very cool to see. Even ARMS, while it does lack content comparatively, is pretty small as well. So it's very nice to know that a lot of these first-party titles are so small. I also want to see what Mario Odyssey will actually be, because that might actually... maybe that's a smaller size too. I don't know. I'm very curious though on some of these file sizes. Very cool to see they're more manageable than some of the larger games out there. Oh, and while we're on the topic of Splatoon 2, we do have another Direct coming up that's apparently going to show some new stuff off from Splatoon 2, which is interesting because we've seen several Directs for it at this point. We've even played it now, but apparently they're going to show us more stuff, and that is July 6th. That's this Thursday, so it's in 2 days from now, and it's going to be at 10 a.m. Eastern or 7 a.m. Pacific time. You'll have to check your time zones comparative to that. If you just type in, I guess, 10 a.m. Eastern, it'll tell you when it's going to be on in your area. And I'm not really sure what they're going to show us here. They haven't even really said, just that it's going to be new stuff for Splatoon 2 that maybe we have not seen or known about yet. So, sure, any Nintendo Direct is cool, and then, of course, Splatoon 2 is out later on this month, so this should be the last one that's kind of getting us excited and ramped up for when the game comes out later on this month. And, of course, it's going to be insanely popular in Japan. It'll be popular in other places, but that's where it's going to be crazy. And the next bit of news is kind of, I guess, a sadder bit of news, and it comes from Glixel. Now, if you know Glixel, they're like a video game website. It's actually owned by like the publishers of Rolling Stone or something. Anyway, it looks like they closed down their San Francisco office and laid off all of the staff. And this happened last Thursday, and we didn't really find out until recently when John Davison, who's the general manager, well, was general manager there, had to post on Facebook just to let everyone know what happened. He said this: "It's taken a couple of days for this to properly sink in, but sadly on Thursday this week, we closed the San Francisco Glixel.com office. I'm incredibly proud of what we achieved over the past year and a half. We set out to build something with a clear vision that covered games differently by making it about people rather than just products. What we started isn't going away, but the future of it will now continue from the Rolling Stone office in New York without us." And it's kind of a shame to see this happen. Obviously, when people lose jobs, it's not a fun thing. And there's probably a lot of people over there who love what they did. I mean, they were covering games on like a publication level where they are writing about, reporting, and even reviewing them. And that can be fun. However, I will say this: costs for those kind of operations, especially if they're running out of place in San Francisco for some reason, I'm sure there are cheaper places they could have done it, it's going to get costly. And even if the Rolling Stone publishers cannot keep it afloat, that is a little concerning. Now, of course, Glixel wasn't the most popular site out there. It's not like IGN, for example, but still, there were a lot of people that it looks like lost their jobs, and it's kind of a shame. Hopefully they land on their feet, maybe find some freelance jobs with IGN to get started and then eventually get hired, or I'm sure there's plenty of other places they can go, and they have some work experience, but still a shame to see this. It appears that they will now continue the website being run from the New York office instead of the remote San Francisco offices. And in our last bit of news, it is a bit of good news actually, because it looks like Open 4 has now returned and it can now be downloaded and used again. Remember how we had that big spat between Rockstar and Take-Two and any of the modding community in Grand Theft Auto? Well, they were okay getting rid of some of the cheating community, the modders that were essentially, I guess you could even call hackers at that point, that gave people the ability to cheat online and really ruin the online experience. But Open 4 was a massive outcry because that was more of a single player modding community where they didn't want to affect the online play, but people figured out that they could. it looks like Rockstar, Take-Two, and Open4, the creators of that, have now worked it out, and Open4 is once again able to be downloaded. This is great news because now the single-player mods will continue. There's no real word on what happened or what they've changed or really anything. They did say, like I was talking about before in a previous episode, that they were trying to figure out something to make this work still, and it looks like they did. Downloads button's back up. Rockstar has not said anything like saying, take that back down. It looks like we're good to go. So if you were worried about the future of mod support on Grand Theft Auto, it looks like you can rest easy because I think they figured it out, and that's great news for everyone who enjoys the crazy mods that we see come out for Grand Theft Auto. And that's it for Newswave today. Make sure you comment, like, and subscribe, all that good stuff. Let me know what you think about any of the stuff we talked about today, whether it is Dragon Quest XI coming westward. Maybe you are really excited to hear about that. I know I am. I need a release date, right? It's good to know that there is promotion going out for the West launch. We don't know when we're going to get it. It could be later this year, it could be next year, it could be 2 years from now. I hope it's sooner rather than later. Maybe you are super happy that Splatoon 2 and Rabbids Kingdom is going to be a small download, you know, a small file size rather than the monstrous 20 to 30 gigabyte downloads we are all getting used to having to do, where we just suck it up, maybe leave it running overnight to download it. That's it for now. I'll see you guys next time.